So, hello and welcome everybody to another Sacred Wisdom podcast. In this podcast today, we are going to discuss the divine nature of Tartaria. And by this, we are talking about the Christ consciousness, the telepathy, the temples, the healing that this civilization lived with. And they actually used this energy, the ether, or however you want to represent it, this other energy that is around us, this electromagnetic field, to enhance their well-being and also use it for astral traveling and ways to transcend. And I'm joined with my amazing brother again, as always. Hello, Stephen. How are you?
Hello, Zach. Yeah, I'm really good, and I hope all's well with you.
Very well, my brother. Very good. And so, first and foremost, let's discuss about how Tartaria used this kind of etheric energy that they tapped in, which I would see as the ether that
Yeah.
they were tapping into, and this consciousness.
So, we've discussed in some detail in previous Sacred Wisdom podcasts, really much to do with the Christ awareness of the Nordic Tartarians, the Turkic peoples, the other inhabitants of the old world empire of Great Tartaria, not just in northern Russia, but all around planet Earth, and how important it was for them to consistently use their divine temples, the light temples, and within those premises, it was really forms of resonant sound healing that was taking place. And this was able really essentially over many months and years of practice for these Nordic Tatars, these Turkic peoples and others to enhance their own individual abilities to understand, discern, and to feel and to sense the Christ awareness, to be able to attune into their higher selves. And also through the use of sound healing, not just for restorative purposes to do with their own biological health, their medical health, and obviously their psychological and mental health, but also their spiritual development. So it was really an essential and a core aspect of the civilization of Great Tartaria to focus on their own divine nature as a collective and individually on the Christ awareness and the use of prayer, the use of the choirs singing, the metal pipe organs, the tuning forks in these divine temples and light temples across the white cities of the old world empire. And so we know that this kind of spiritual approach that was taken was ultimately geared towards focusing on reaching into the 4D holographic reality of the astral plane and using the Christ awareness to create a much more intense form of societal unity between these Nordic Tatarians, the Turkic peoples, the other inhabitants of Great Tatar, the Old World Empire, and to keep trying to reunify the continuity of the civilization by keeping these frequencies and vibrations in a much more faster oscillating rate. And this obviously as a harmonic was able to then act as a form of, shall we say, electromagnetic resilience against, shall we say, perhaps negative entities or demons or astral spirits that may try and use forms of intrapsychic vector attacks on the thoughts, the minds, the cognition of these Nordic Tatarians and the Turkic peoples across northern Russia and in all the colonies of the old world empire. So it was seen as a very important aspect to the development of themselves, their civilization. So the divine nature of Tartaria was immensely important over many generations. So, and we have to also understand the use of sound healing, these resonant cymatic patterns of healing that were consistently being used in the divine temples and the light temples of these white cities was therefore also designed to keep the individual, the laity, the parishioners, the attendees within these premises very focused on the Christ awareness and the sense that the ether that was being drawn down as telluric electricity itself had certain vibratory characteristics that allowed that ether to interlink with the 4D holographic reality of the astral plane. So you can sense really that when we perceive, going back through the passage of time to Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire, across northern Russia and in many other parts of the world, in the Caucasus region and Eastern Europe, and ultimately seen in parts of North America and Australia and elsewhere. We can see that it was very etheric or very ethereal, and therefore the divine nature of Tartaria was really integral to the collective and personalized spiritual development of every man and woman and child in those white cities across the old world empire.
Right, it's amazing, Steve. Right, brilliantly put. And first of all, just with regarding people watching, some will get confused about actually what Christ consciousness is. And I know
Yeah.
we've talked about it before, but
Yeah.
just give a little breakdown on Christ
Yes.
consciousness.
So Christ consciousness, in terms of resonant frequency and vibration, is really a state of human consciousness where the individual reaches a point in their thoughts, their own cognition, through prayer, through meditation, through singing, chanting, individually or in choirs, combined with the tuning forks, as we saw in Great Tatar and Northern Russia and elsewhere, to the sense where they are understanding in an immediate effect the divine love of the universal creator of heaven and earth, and understanding that the Christ awareness is really that interlink between their own soul personality and the divine love, the eternal mind of the universal creator. So that then instills a sense of infinite oneness and a sense of infinite nowness, where the individual concerned and then therefore the collective within that Christ awareness is reached as a state of enlightenment, where they are in a state of beingness with themselves. So they're not constantly identifying with their own egocentric thoughts, with greed, with putting themselves first through the Christ awareness. It's about putting everybody else first. Imagine everybody was putting everybody else first. You create an intensely selfless societal model. And this is what we see in the old world empire of Great Tartaria, northern Russia, all the colonies. And so that's really what the Christ awareness is. Now, obviously, when it comes to Yeshua ben Yosef, the Lord Jesus Christ,
yeah, what
he
is
was on
that?
it.
Because that's very interesting, you see, because
Yeah.
obviously he was called Christ. So talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, he himself was completely self-realized, in understanding on a soul level that he had infinite oneness with the universal creator. So essentially, he was and is the Son of God. But we are all the sons and daughters of the Lord God Almighty, the universal creator. And so it's a universal principle that allows you to reach the universal creator through this interlinking conduit in terms of spiritual development. That is the Christ awareness. So it's not just something in the Holy Bible and the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's a much older concept,
And
and it goes
Christos, the
back.
word Christ, Christos goes back to the Greek language, doesn't it?
Yeah, from the actual Greek language, the word Christos itself actually means anointed.
Interesting.
So yeah, so in sense, when you are in the Christ awareness, you are anointed, you are blessed, you are guided, you reach a state of perfected summation with the divine love of the universal creator. And obviously for these Nordic Tatarians, the Turkic peoples, and everyone else, and that included actually many of the Sami or the Laplanders that you see today in living in the Kola Peninsula, the Murmansk Oblast of northwestern Russia, and also in parts of obviously Finland, in the Fennoscandia region, in across that general location. So we know that it was an immensely important part of the societal progression of the civilization of Great Tatar and the Old World Empire. And the Christ awareness was fully connected or interlinked with the ether and the use of telluric electricity. So there was a continual crossover between the idea of the occult technology being used for anti-gravity transportation with the airships, the use of obviously the drawing down of the ether, or the telluric electricity from the atmosphere above these white cities, with aerials, with metallic arrays and so forth, down into these ground floor and basement electric generators for heating and lighting purposes. But the very actionalization of that sort of technical process was really freeing up the actual labor time, or the work time of the Nordic Tartarians and the Turkic peoples in the old world empire, to then focus again much more on their own spiritual development, leading towards the Christ awareness, and therefore definitely making all of these inhabitants very much part of the divine nature of Tartaria.
So do you think this was educated from a very young age, this
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely.
knowledge?
Yeah,
And
it
it
was
was
integral. Yeah.
and have you ever I've never seen, but from research I've done, but how Tartarians were educated? Was it done in congregations? Would have been done in the healing temples? This
We
how hmm,
I know from a lot of there's a lot of medieval woodcuts that have come out of the Russian Federation. These go back to, obviously, to the time of medieval Russia and then Imperial Russia. And from many of these medieval woodcuts, and also many of the fine art that has been created using ink, different inks on
right.
parchment, we know from northern Russia there were vast numbers of these divine temples and light temples. And so I think the divine temples that we use for education purposes were more geared towards very private based prayer and meditation work. The light temples is where you saw a lot more of the stained glass windows and the combining of these chromatic wavelengths and the photons pouring through these
Mm,
stained glass windows, that obviously with the different types of quartz that we used and the tuning forks, you had this intermixture of both luminescence and the resonance coming from the different acoustic reverberations from the metal pipe organs there. So these were forms of education that were instilled into the youth of Great Tatar, whether they were Nordic Tatarians or the Turkic peoples.
mm,
And it was seen as integral. You had to educate the very young inhabitants in those white cities across northern Russia and parts of the Caucasus region, Eastern Europe, North America, and everywhere else at a very early age. So they fully understood the importance of spiritual development of the self, the integrity of each soul personality, and ultimately your relationship as an inhabitant of Great Tartaria with the universal creator of heaven and earth, and understanding that interlink between heaven and earth, between the ether and the ground level, the white cities, which
mm.
themselves really were symbolic in that sense of heaven on earth, being those white cities across the old world empire of Great Tartaria. So it was a very different type of material world, inverted commas, perhaps much more of a spirit world, but within the 3D holographic reality of this material dimension, it was a perfected integration and balance between the practicalities of living. Obviously, we discussed at length in previous Sacred Wisdom podcasts the idea of electroculture, using the ether or telluric electricity
Mm.
to accelerate the growth and expand upon the yield of fruits and vegetables and cereal crops. We know that the Nordic Tatarians and these Turkic peoples, we would class them as vegetarians or vegans in the modern age.
But I would believe the giants, we spoke about this before, that it's very
Yeah.
possible that they were breatharians, wasn't it? That
That's
actually
definitely yes, and we know that out of early Tartaria, that transitioned into becoming the old world empire of Great Tartaria. There was this incredible spiritual transformation, and it is likely that the white giants or the Tartarian giants, whose genetic ancestry came from the time of Hyperborean, the Arctic North Polar region in northern Russia, where there was these Hyperborean giants. Some were also called the Cyclopean giants, had been derived. We know that there really isn't any documents in Greek mythology or Greek folklore that ever mention that they were actually the consumers of meat products. So it is likely that there must have been some kind of teaching and instruction that went on with the white giants of Great Tartaria in the Old World Empire. Many of these white giants, as you know, lived on the North American continent.
mm.
And I mean, this is probably a subject for another day, but we know that many of those white giants, they did descend into what we can call the hollow earth. And obviously for many individuals that's a conspiracy theory, but we know that was
There
what
is
they did.
evidence to state
Yeah,
there is something definitely within our earth, 100%.
absolutely. And there's a lot of stories from world mythology and world folklore,
Mm.
from many of the different Native
What
American
exactly
tribes.
that is,
They
we
can
can
mention
only
this.
speculate. We can only speculate.
Yeah,
but there is definitely
it is
something. But I just
speculation, definitely.
with, with the religion side of things, what's interesting, do you think like Hinduism, Buddhism,
Yeah.
Christianity, these were religions that were set up to actually access types of Christ consciousness? Or obviously not every religion, there's certain
Well,
control mechanisms as well, but the obviously the primary teachings of certain religions, they core belief structures on reaching that higher connection.
well, we know from studying Irish Druidism and British Druidism, which really, in terms of its customs, the teachings tail ends from really the spiritual teachings that were taught in the divine temples and the light temples of Atlantis.
But like
We know
religion
that
was
when it
like
comes,
adapted for the reality we live in now. I mean,
yeah,
obviously,
a lot of it's, yes, that is correct. But we know that in Irish Druidism and British Druidism, if you do the research into it, that the religions that we now know as Judaism and the religion of Christianity and obviously and Islam and Hinduism and Buddhism, actually in the Irish Gaelic, the etymologies of all of those different world religions
wow,
actually were a type of grading system or a grade in terms of spiritual development. Now, it's a lot to go into in this Sacred Wisdom
interesting.
podcast, but we know that in the Irish Gaelic there is specific etymologies for these different religions. So, Judaism, the actual root meanings of that, you obviously people would say, oh, well, that's all to do with the Hebrew language and so forth. And you would then go through to Christianity, its
Mm.
connections to Aramaic and to classical Greek. And then obviously you go on from there and you can see it with Islam and Aramaic and Arabic and the Turkish language. But if you go far enough back, so we're going back again into the antediluvian period, that's before the first great flood and the second great flood, the very rudimentary aspects of all these world religions, from Judaism to Christianity to Islam to Hinduism to Buddhism and so forth, have their origins, actually much of it anyway, on a rudimentary level within Irish Druidism and British
Wow.
Druidism. But obviously over thousands of years,
It's been
those
kind of
religions
adapted.
then morphed, local dialects. You had a lot of intermixing of different tribal communities, different ethnic groupings. And this is what you see in this 3D holographic reality. The material dimension is reincarnation taking place over thousands and thousands of years, civilizations rising and falling. And then we also have to remember, like with the Holy Bible, it's been rewritten hundreds of
Yeah.
times
And
over
it was
many,
written, I think, 200 years after the event.
at very least, yes.
Yeah,
So it's therefore very difficult to really gauge what happened in the distant past. One of the ways actually we could do that when it comes to the divine nature of Tartaria is, and this has been done by certain individuals, they have looked back using scientific remote viewing or SRV,
mm,
and it's been confirmed that Great Tartaria in the Old World Empire, it did exist, it actually did, and there was a massive push to delete from the historical timeline and narratives in this 3D holographic reality of the material dimension anything to do with Great Tartaria, because the divine nature of the Old World Empire
of
was
course.
based on the use of the ether, this telluric electricity,
Mm,
and the use of anti-gravity based occult technology, not the combustion engine based petrochemical, very mechanically delinquent and very primitive kind of transportation that we see still here in the 21st century in the modern age. And yet we would know that, for example, in many countries on planet Earth, anti-gravity technology we're talking portable level anti-gravity in terms
of
of the
course.
size of cars, vans,
Yeah.
and so forth, the
Well, the
motorbikes,
Vimanas.
has
I
been
mean, there's
perfected.
the Vimanas, all the direct proof of that. All this stuff.
Oh, you
There's
see that, for
information on.
example, absolutely. So when you look at the word Vimana, it's singular, it means traverser.
Yeah.
And so you have the Maha Vimana. These were the great traversers in the Sanskrit language. These were floating cities that anything from 5,000 up to 8,000 plus inhabitants lived in. And this is why
Wow.
if you go to India
So
and
maybe
other
that
parts,
relates back to the floating cities in the old world, which some people
that's right.
discuss and all this.
And they existed.
Interesting.
These floating cities were literally aerial, shall we say, aerial stations of one form or another, where the airships would dock along the landmass of northern Russia, as well as in many other parts of the old world empire. So you had this
Wow.
constant interplay between, again, the heaven and the earth, the ether, the use of the divine temples, the light temples, the incredible iridescence of different colors in the nighttime that would have
I just want
sparkled
to
on these
interject, Steve.
cities. It's so immensely beautiful,
I
really,
know
all of it.
because while you're talking now, obviously people listening, some people will just see that as like a sci-fi film.
Yeah,
But
of course.
we
Yeah,
have to remember the old world. This was before the frequencies and all the stuff
that is
we have
correct.
around us
Yeah,
now. Now, me and Stephen both lived through the 80s, so we went through the development of the analog age and into the
that's right.
digital. And I can tell you, it was very different.
The
And
use of the home
our
computer. Yeah,
grandparents felt very different about when they were in the 40s and 50s, and then they discussed how their parents went walked around with a horse and cart and how different the world was. So the point
that's
I'm
right.
making is it's just so different. So
That's
it's
right.
very hard to comprehend this concept of a floating city,
Mm.
but in that world, the whole dynamics of science and physics would be very different.
And that's that well, you can even call it ether physics. So what
All
we
right,
look
yeah.
at with the occult technology, it wasn't just in Great Tartaria. We know that in Vedic India they had
Mm,
perfected the use of gravity technologies. We know that they had these abilities. We know that they were able to literally levitate, as I said, these vast Mahavamana, these great traverses with 5,000 to 8,000 or more inhabitants.
mm,
We know that the occult technology was used actually in some parts of classical Greece, in mainland Greece, and therefore some of the Greek islands. It was used obviously in the civilization that existed on the Atlantean continent and the Atlantean islands. We have to remember that Atlantis was a globally based civilization. So its main islands and everything else was obviously in the North Atlantic Ocean, but it had colonies all over Western Europe, actually in the British Isles, in the Irish Republic we see today. It had colonies on the eastern seaboard of the United States of America, in New York State, in that area. We also know that in South America, where Brazil is today, as an example, there was huge colonies from the civilization of Atlantis, and all of them were using anti-gravity based occult technology. They fully understood the use of the ether or telluric electricity. They
mm.
also understood that you could use it to open actual stargates or dimensional portals on various geomagnetic ley lines that were intersected.
So you could actually fold space time. So it goes back to the whole kind of
That's right.
anti-gravity vehicles where these are tuned in.
Anti-gravity vehicles.
Yeah, I
Now
agree.
you have
This
to
is all
remember
tuned in. This is all connected, isn't it? This is
that's
where
right. And there's a key connection between the different densities of gravity and
mm,
actually the continuity of space-time in a steady form. So when it comes to variations in gravitational influence, that itself will then also affect
mm,
how linear space-time is firstly perceived and how you interact with it. Now, many of the Native American tribes, both in the United States of America and in the Dominion of Canada, were fully aware of this in Native American folklore for thousands of years.
mm,
They descended into openings in the Appalachian Mountains, in the Rocky Mountains, in the Cascade Range, and so forth, where they felt themselves slowing down. They felt younger. Their actual any ailments or sicknesses they had disappeared, and this is something that's been noticed, from the various stories of world mythology and world folklore, where you get this idea that the further you descend into the hollow earth, the more there's a shift in how space-time functions and
mm,
operates. And that's why so many of the inhabitants are believed to
mm.
live for thousands of years in the hollow earth. Yeah. So I think this is a type of knowledge that I think the Nordic Tatarians and the Turkic peoples who lived with such abundance and happiness within the white cities of the old world empire and across northern Russia and elsewhere, they had a real understanding of that. They really understood there was a connection between the ether or this telluric electricity
Oh yeah.
and the 4D holographic reality of the astral plane, as well as the fact that you could open these stargates on certain geomagnetic ley lines. And I think the Nordic hyperboreans that had existed with such abundance and spiritual prowess in the Arctic North Polar region also had a really detailed and clear understanding of what the ether really represented. And we see how different Western science is today. It doesn't even want to acknowledge the existence
Well,
of the
we
ether.
spoke about it before, and we'll come on to it a bit later, but the Morley experiment, and how that
Yeah.
was almost to disprove this concept, and they measured it through the
Yes.
inframometer, it was called, and I mean, it's unbelievable because literally they were firing the light around,
Yes.
splitting the light, firing it around these mirrors, and this apparently was telling us whether the ether existed or not. And they based so
Yeah.
much. There's a little bit more to it than that, and there's a bit more depth to it. But look, there's no doubt what you just said about when you were talking about like the kind of idea of this ether. You only have to look at all the tribal cultures around the world that have been decimated to see that, and
Yeah.
look at their connection. And obviously you've got the aboriginals, which are the most obvious ones, but that these tribes have been under a lot of pressure to become westernized. All right, so you
Yeah.
can see that with culture, and it's like they held, especially the aboriginals, they held the sound vibration, and they were all into levitation techniques with their
Yeah,
sound.
but then
Oh,
when you take a look, for example, the use of the didgeridoo by the various Australian Aborigines, we know that they fully understood how to access, again, the stargates using the geomagnetic ley lines that crisscross so much of
mm,
the Great Australian Desert around the Blue Mountains and so forth in Australia. We know that, for example, their actual ancestry is genetically connected to the Lemurian continent that we're told never even existed.
right,
And
right.
we know that the Tamil Dravidians that come from southern India
Yeah.
also have genetic ancestry that goes back again to the Lemurian continent. We know
Mhm.
again that this is not accepted by Western science. That when it
But that's
comes
been
to,
proven, isn't it? The
yeah,
Tamal, the DNA actually comes from the Aboriginals, isn't it?
there's a direct, yeah, there's a
Mm,
lot of genetic connections between the Tamil Dravidians
mm,
and the Australian Aborigines. And again, we see the deletion of these cultures, the rewriting of these cultures, the erasing of what went on in the antediluvian period, before the first great flood, the second great flood, what went on during the upper Paleolithic, and obviously through to the Neolithic age or the New Stone Age. And so much of the past is being deleted or suppressed to
mm.
fit the narrative of Western science to control human consciousness.
Yeah.
And so
Some people would
this was
say
the
it's for the.
direct threat that was really faced by the Nordic Tartarians and these Turkic peoples that lived with such abundance in the white cities of the Old World Empire. When you think about this, they constructed these incredibly luminescent white cities such as Mulgam, Bayada, Kambulik, Bargu within northern Tartaria, and the extensive Piacida region and the Jakuti region of northern Tartaria, where electroculture was so prevalent. There was this vast numbers of these divine temples, these light temples that were so iridescent. So these individuals were experts at creating a perfected way of life based on the use of the Christ awareness and spiritual principles,
Mm,
where their own integrity as soul personalities before the divine love and the eternal mind of the universal creator was given such importance. We know that the white city of Dukagir in the Zuxari region of northern Tartaria was seen with immense importance, and the white cities of Dowry and Nika Eklo in the Oensky region of southern Tartaria were literally areas where there were vast, ornately decorated, sparkling palaces and stately homes, as well as these divine temples and light temples. And all
This
of
was
this
this was all
was
destroyed,
decimated.
and that's completely destroyed, right?
Yeah.
With these from the natural disasters, do you feel they were all destroyed? I mean,
I
it
think
was.
it's a mixture of different things.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get into wild and silly irrational conspiracy theories. Again, we know that the expanse of the civilization of Great Tartaria was so incredibly vast
Yeah.
that they were so proficient. They were such experts in building these white cities and the perfect control and management of the ether or the telluric electricity to
Mm,
really continue to define their civilization as the divine nature of Tartaria. And we know the same kinds of luminosity were radiating all the time from the white city of Defert in the Gilead region of eastern Tartaria, and the
yeah.
white city of Makojkoi in the Ostaki region of western Tartaria. And it goes on and on and on. We see that these were these were townships and white cities that are clearly marked on maps for hundreds and hundreds of years
Mm,
by cartographers from France, from Belgium, from the Netherlands, from Germany,
mhm,
from Denmark, and from the United Kingdom of Great Britain. And suddenly we see this massive deletion after the third mud flood, and we see the rollout of these world fairs. So there's this ginormous sort of transition away from accepting that the ether of telluric electricity and the Christ awareness was of any importance
mm.
to the mechanization of thought, the use of third-party debt usury, and
Yeah.
that, whether you're living in a residential premises or it's an industrialized area or it's a commercial premises, you're going to pay for that electricity, and a lot of
Mm,
individuals and policymakers and rulers and so forth are going to make a lot of profit out of charging you money for something that is actually boundless in the
mm.
atmosphere. And this ether was known going right the way back to the time of classical Greece. It was known in the Roman Empire.
Of course.
So it was known a long time ago, going back a long time, really, before the emergence of Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire. And obviously, it was known, as I've mentioned already, by the Nordic hyperboreans that exist in the Arctic North Polar region,
Mm,
and was used on their crystal pyramids, these granite pyramids, these pyramids of healing, these pyramids of sound restoration, want of a better phrase. It was so important for these
mm,
individuals. So it's like everything's being deliberately steered away from from human beings focusing on frequency and resonance.
mm.
They don't want any individual, Homo sapiens or human beings are not meant to be focusing on that, because that leads to the idea of sound healing. So
Yeah.
many
And it
sicknesses
just
and
opens up all
ailments.
Pandora's box, doesn't it? And then you
It,
start
oh,
getting every starts coming through. And it's
that's right.
about remembering,
Everything's,
Steve. It's what we do. It's like you
yeah,
start going, oh, the possibility. You start
yeah,
realizing when you research this stuff and
yeah,
you start looking into the various topics, you realize that is
yeah,
very possible. And
that's right.
and when you look at things at a surface level and you look at the world fairs and you just told a brief story on a couple of sentences, all this stuff,
Yeah,
it's just very easy to dismiss it. But
that's
the
right.
truth of it is, all the information is there. We have all this knowledge, and it's our job to look into it.
Mm.
As Joseph Campbell says, this reality is about the mystery of mythology. This reality is finding out and discovering that mythology, discovering them archetypes, discovering, that mission, that journey that we're on. And
Yes,
yeah, it is
yes, I'd
pretty
agree.
bad. I
Yeah.
mean, it's awful that we come away from this, but there's for a reason, don't you believe? And it comes
Yeah,
down to our soul experience, and that's
I
again.
think so. Yeah, it's just it's saddening. It's very depressing and very sobering, actually, that you realize that many Homo sapiens or humans only learn through continual suffering. The idea of thermonuclear conflicts or something like that, or the idea of some kind of sicknesses that can, cause harm to individuals, and anything that is fearful is unfortunately is something that is played upon in the thoughts of human beings, and it's very detrimental to people's spiritual development. But
And you
what
can
we
see this in the past, all the way, all throughout the history timeline. Every time technology evolution gets to a point, consciousness gets to a high point, we get this happen, and it's happening right now, and it's going to happen more and more as it goes on.
Yeah, this is the conflict between, you can say, between the forces of good and the forces of evil. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not like, it could be seen as archetypal like that. And when you look at the work of, for example, Carl Gustav Jung, and many of those brilliant quotes from so many of his different publications that were
Mm,
compiled by
amazing.
Jolan Jacobi in the book called Psychological Reflections, you
Yeah.
understand how Carl Gustav Jung, as many of his students, viewed the concept of good and evil.
Mm.
And this constant sort of battling and conflicting that's going on in the minds of Homo sapiens or human beings, because really that's where it comes from. Is all the errors and dysfunctionality we see in the modern age are coming from the really very dysfunctional thoughts and cognition of millions upon millions of human beings here on planet Earth.
Mm.
So when it's a time of forgetting, now I'd say there is a reversal. This is a time of steady remembering
Mm.
on, for each soul personality that's here, that's incarnated to be here on planet Earth at this time in the 21st century of the modern age, regardless of how dark and miserable things get. But we have to remember that just before literally the holy light, the divine light shimmers and breaks through, you get the most intense darkness building and
Yep.
developing. And
And
that's where
but
we are
we
now.
you see that through. It is a real challenge, and I
Yeah,
know everybody's going through this at the moment on a personal level and outer level.
that's right.
But
Yeah,
when you see it through, it's worthwhile because
it,
that
it is. It
is so
is.
vital for our development.
And if we think, when we look at many of the wonderful premises that are owned, for example, by the Church of England or the Anglican Church here in the United Kingdom of Great Britain, or perhaps the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican City State in many countries around planet Earth, they
Mm.
have stained glass window. But when we look at obviously the divine temples, the light temples in the white cities of Great Tartaria, northern Russia, and the Old World Empire, we see very clearly the use of different types of quartz crystals. So they obviously had diaphanite or clear quartz,
Mm.
amethyst or purple quartz, galazine or blue quartz, coconite or red quartz or ruby,
Yeah.
citrine or yellow quartz, galactodite or milky quartz, rosine or pink quartz, and prasiolite, which is green quartz. And so what kind of photonic wavelength effects would such pure quartz crystal have when it's combined with tuning forks and these metal pipe organs and these wonderful choral voices from these adults and children who were the laity, the parishioners that would go in these divine temples and light temples with such joyful happiness and unity and excitement on a regular basis, perhaps twice a week, maybe on a Wednesday, maybe on a Sunday, perhaps it was just weekdays, we don't know. But we know that really the downfall of the civilization of Great Tartaria was a level of different factors, and I think all of them were just really disasters on different levels that incrementally developed and increased over the passage of time. Like so many civilizations that obviously we can look at, the civilization of Atlantis as an example, they fade away in the historical timelines. I think that's really what happens, and they fragment. Populations are on the move, and they
Yeah.
have to resettle elsewhere. We talked in great detail of the orphan train movement and the children of Great Tatar in the Old World Empire, and how they were adopted, in different locations across the United States of America, and the Dominion of Canada is, so it's really distressing and saddening what goes on. But I do think on a much more long-term level, I'd say esoterically, this is for each soul personality to really understand these different levels of experientiality for their own ultimate development, and to really feel and sense their own existence, and to try and maintain some level of integrity, so that
Mm.
each soul personality therefore can really develop its relationship with the universal creator of heaven and earth, just as the Nordic Tatarians
Mm.
and these Turkic peoples and many other inhabitants, such as the Sami or the Laplanders from the Kola Peninsula or the Mangsta Blast of northwestern Russia and the Fennoscandia region, did. So it's very important. We know from many different tribal cultures, as you mentioned earlier,
Mm.
such as the Australian Aborigines, who are immensely spiritual individuals.
Yeah.
Um, you
They're
know,
the
they,
only
they,
cultures that never use psychotropic drugs
yeah.
in any way to access the divine creator. They
Well, you can
use
you can see
sound.
that with the Australian outback, because if you look at a lot of it, it looks very ethereal and very otherworldly in
Oh
some
yeah.
ways. It's quite, it's like it's like the far away south. You head out from any of the cities like Adelaide or Sydney or Brisbane or wherever,
Hmm.
and you go inland by a few hundred miles. It's like
Another
two
world.
completely separate environments. So
Yeah, and I feel that there's a sort of which we don't fully understand yet as beings because we're still developing our spirituality. But I feel this is a past life thing, and people do come back into reality and into
yeah,
lives to remember, help people remember.
yeah,
And one of those guys we had back in 1979, around that date, 70s or some stage, but John Hutchison.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
he was
Mhm.
an amazing individual.
He
That
was, yeah.
his actual full proof that how sound this sound levitation works and how
Yes.
this is all going about, and he actually created sounds and frequencies that actually could lift objects and move objects. And these objects, these were one in the video was a cannonball he actually got to lift
Yes,
up.
incredible. Yeah,
But he was an
absolutely.
amazing individual, and also kind of just put to the side, like all the others, Scharberger, all these others, Tesla,
Yeah.
just
Oh, they're
put a lot.
just, yeah, exactly.
But amazing. So yeah, well, John Hutchison, yeah, and we've mentioned John Hutchison many times, but an amazing man,
Another
amazing
individual
individual.
that should be really given a mention, who he actually lives in Vienna in Eastern Austria, is an individual by the name of Bernard Rathisa. Now,
Ah,
he established what is called the Institut für Wasser und Umweltverbesserung, which translates into
wow.
the English language for the Institute for Water and Environmental Improvement, on
Right.
the 18th of February 1994 in the town of Sankt Urban in the Feldkirchen district of the Carinthia state in South Austria. Now, he was very, very, very influenced by the living energy of Victor Schauberger. So really, in a way, he was a sort
Following
of
his work.
unofficially appointed student of the teachings
Ah.
of Victor Schauberger. So he's a fascinating individual, and he's done incredible amounts of researches. So I would suggest anybody that's interested into understanding, the use of the ether and telluric electricity and resonance, acoustic reverberation and sound healing and water, go
Mm,
and look at the actual the developments that Bernard Rathiser has created at the Institute for Water and Environmental Improvement. So
mm.
very interesting. That's still being continued, even though it's seen as a sideline of immense relevance by Western science, who don't take much notice of anything he's doing.
Well, I think that's what people have to do. They have to go down their own avenues of research and find
Yeah,
these things out and do their own experiments. What I'd say to anybody out there watching, watch what Stephen mentioned earlier about the crystalline glass and the stained
yeah,
glass and these, sounds, the tuning forks and all this.
that's right.
Try
Yeah,
it out. Try experiment a bit yourself. Go out there and you can purchase all this on various websites and
you
put
can.
it
Yeah,
together and see how it works. See, if you're getting a cold or I don't know, maybe an illness, experiment with this and see, experiment with frequencies. I'm experimenting with different Schumann resonances and seeing how they can affect my own field. And there is
yes,
definitely no doubt there's certain frequencies that resonate in my body, and I can feel the healing and stuff going on. And anybody watching, I'm sure you're aware that you've got sound baths. If you know in your area, sound bath is using the gongs. Go along to one of them and go and have a nice gong bath, and just you'll feel amazing after this. So that's only part of it though. But with the
yeah.
crystalline glass, it's incredible what
And you,
what you spoke about.
you mentioned John Hutchinson, and we were another individual that I think is very important to give a mention to is Dr. Leonard George Horowitz.
Yeah,
He's
yeah, of
noted
course.
for the 528 hertz research that he's done, and obviously the connections to the physical universe,
The love
and
frequency, right?
yeah, and so the love frequency that he really has given so much time to in his presentations and his publications. I mean, Dr. Leonard George Horowitz, I think, is an absolute genius. I'd say much of his research is like that of Nikola Tesla, like
Yeah,
that of Victor Schauberger, and Bernard Rathiser, and many other individuals. Perhaps we could say Wilhelm Reich as well. So
yeah.
these individuals were all touching on the use of ether or the telluric electricity, whether it's to do with sound healing and acoustics, or for the use of water for various energetic purposes, for
Mm,
example. So we know that it was a very multifarious process that went on when it came to the use of the ether or the telluric electricity, not
mm,
just in the divine temples and the light temples of these white cities, but in the stately homes, in even going back to the time of the crystal pyramids, the granite pyramids of Hyperborean, the Arctic North Polar region, which obviously includes large expanses of northern Russia.
mm,
We know this was a very normalized aspect of the occult technology in all these different civilizations, as with many of these different academics and polymaths. we see in the modern age of the 21st century.
Mm.
And yet still Western science isn't interested, doesn't want to know. And we
Yeah,
still
it's
have this petrochemical industry on planet Earth
mm,
that's very, very primitive, really.
yeah.
Still have rubber tires on road vehicles and tarmac roads. It's incredibly antiquated, all of it, really.
We've gone so deep into it, and it's a system that so many people have got used to. It's quite a hard one to
It's
come out of.
familiarization over many decades.
It
Yeah.
is. It's the imprinting, and people don't know
Yeah.
otherwise. But there is the technology seeping through bit by bit. And I
Yeah.
advise everybody to go out there, look at everybody we've discussed in this podcast, and do your own experiments. Find out for yourself and
Yeah.
see what works. See
Absolutely.
how
Yeah.
it can affect your body. And Steve, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think I've said everything I wanted to during this Sacred Wisdom podcast. It's been really, really fantastic that we could have this discussion and present this kind of information. I think it's been absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, we enjoy very much in giving it all to everybody watching, and the stuff we research and look into and discuss a lot like this. We have a lot of phone conversations where we just chat very openly about big
Yeah,
subjects. So
absolutely
it's
do. Yeah.
lovely to
Yeah.
bring it onto this podcast and share it with you all. And our book is available, Luminous Worlds, on Amazon in paperback and ebook. And it's a very nice size. It's a lot of excellent research in there. Really great book. And we do have another book coming out very soon as well. But for now, it's a bye from me.
And it's goodbye for me.